An elderly man is shot dead in front of his family at a July 4th celebration. No one knows where the bullet came from. How can police track down his killer? A charismatic leader of the Black Panthers is killed in a police raid. His supporters say he was assassinated. The police claim they shot him in self-defense. Can a forensic expert determine who is lying? A child dies in a drive-by shooting. Can a state-of-the-art computer link evidence from this crime to another and win a conviction? It takes a split second for a gun to deliver death. Solving the crime takes much longer, but with increasing speed, expertise, and accuracy, forensic detectives are zeroing in on their deadly target. In Bloomingdale, Illinois, a small town 40 miles northwest of Chicago, July 4th, 1989 began like any other Independence Day. Like people all across America, families and friends gathered to celebrate the country's birthday by relaxing and holding the traditional backyard barbecue. Kids amused themselves with sparklers, while eagerly waiting for the sun to set and the town fireworks display to begin. On the picnic grounds, a carnival provided an endless array of diversions, something for everyone to enjoy. But for one Bloomingdale family, the celebration ended in tragedy. In a field near the picnic grounds, the family joined a crowd gathered to await the fireworks. The grandfather passed time playing with his grandchildren. Then, without warning, he tumbled out of his chair. His wife thought he had a heart attack.
What's the matter? Is everything okay?
Two off-duty detectives happened to be picnicking with their own families nearby. They rushed to offer assistance. When they turned over the man's body, they found a bloody wound beneath his ribs, a bullet hole. This 64-year-old grandfather had been shot dead. Shock was followed almost immediately by mystification. No one had heard a shot or seen anything. A search of the field came up empty. No gun, not even a spent cartridge could be found. The killing was the most baffling case the Bloomingdale police had ever encountered. Who had shot the man and why? Unraveling the mystery, forging a link between victim and killer, would demand all the ingenuity forensic experts could muster. Lieutenant Richard Vaughn is the ballistics examiner at the DuPage County Sheriff's Department. As soon as an autopsy had been performed, the Bloomingdale police called him in. The coroner confirmed that a bullet had struck the victim on the right side, then penetrated beneath the rib cage, causing his death. He also recovered the bullet. Fortunately, it had not hit bone and was in near pristine condition. Vaughn's initial task was to try to establish what kind of gun had fired it, so he and detectives could begin to look for the gun and, ultimately, its owner. Under his scrutiny, the bullet's size and weight and any physical marks could provide vital information.
The evidence bullet in this case, the first question would be, what caliber is it? Caliber is determined by the weight of the bullet and by the diameter of the bullet.
Vaughn started by weighing the bullet on a digital balance. Then he measured it with an instrument called a micrometer. When the process was completed, he determined the bullet was a .44 caliber. It had come from one of the most powerful handguns on the market, a .44 Magnum revolver. Several companies manufacture such weapons. Vaughn had to determine the make and model of the one that shot the fatal bullet. He placed the bullet under a microscope and examined its rifling characteristics. All guns leave a series of spiral grooves on a bullet as it speeds down the barrel. The number of grooves, their width, and whether they twist to the left or right varies with the manufacturer. This particular bullet had 6 grooves and 6 lands, the raised regions in between. They spiraled along the bullet with a right-hand twist. Now Vaughn turned to a device called a measuring projection unit. It enabled him to accurately determine the widths of each land and groove. Armed with this information, Vaughn turned to a computer database called the General Rifling Characteristics File. Maintained by the FBI, it contains information about thousands of weapons. Feeding in the caliber, number, and width of lands and grooves, and the directional twist of the bullet, enabled him to identify the probable make of the gun.
We had a groove width measurement of 0.129 thousandths of an inch. When we then refer to the .44 Magnum caliber category, you will note that the probable make and model of firearm that could have fired the evidence bullet was a firearm manufactured by Sturm Ruger, and the model would be the Red Hawk model.
Within 2 hours, Vaughn developed a vital piece of evidence. The gun was a Sturm Ruger Red Hawk .44 Magnum. But a search of local gun shops turned up no record of any such weapon being sold. Vaughn decided the only way to trace the killer was to find where the bullet had been fired from.
We started out with this measurement where we had...
An ammunition manual told him that a Ruger Red Hawk .44 Magnum has a maximum range of about 1.5 miles. But the chances of locating where the bullet had been fired in an area that large would be next to impossible. To reduce the search area, Vaughn went back to the site of the killing to reconstruct the incident. All that he required was a mannequin, a lawn chair, and a wooden dowel. He seated the mannequin in the same place and position as the victim. Then he inserted the dowel through its body in the precise angle of the bullet wound.
The dowel rod now represents the actual trajectory of the bullet. Since we have an entrance wound here on the right side and the bullet was recovered on the left side, you'll note that the dowel rod is pointing in this direction here. We will now refer to this as the alleged flight path of the bullet.
The dowel pointed roughly northwest. If Vaughn was right, that was the direction from which the bullet had been fired. Back in his lab, he began to map out the area where the police should concentrate their search.
This is a Bloomingdale Township map which I was able to pick up at the Highway Department, which I took to the scene. And it demonstrates or depicts the search area. You'll note this area here is the open field in which the spectators were seated waiting for the 4th of July fireworks to occur in this area here. The decedent was seated in a chair here. Now, we had determined by a quadrant that our search area was going to be to the north and northwest.
But from where in this search area had the bullet been fired? Vaughn's references told him the muzzle velocity of a Red Hawk is 1,200 feet per second. But from the 15-inch deep wound in the dead man, a medical examiner estimated the bullet slowed down to less than 700 feet per second when it hit. With the help of a computer ballistics expert, Vaughn calculated how far the bullet must have traveled for its velocity to have been reduced to this amount.
We came to realize that the impact velocity being approximately 450 feet to 700 feet per second, that we would have to concentrate our search in an area between 500 yards and 700 yards. So our search area would have been in this span right here. So what we did is we actually established a cone of origin, if you will, where we would focus our search from this line depicted here to this roadway, which is depicted here.
After After narrowing the search area, Vaughn and police combed the neighborhoods between 500 and 700 yards northwest of the picnic grounds. They conducted door-to-door interviews, searching for any evidence that a large caliber gun had been fired. Eventually, they arrived at a residence on Lawrence Avenue. During a search of the backyard, they made a crucial discovery. In a corner was a 55-gallon drum perforated with holes. Vaughn felt they could have been made by .44 caliber bullets. The edges showed little sign of rust, suggesting they were new. Had they been made by the same magnum that killed the elderly man? To find out, Vaughn had to recover one of the bullets and compare it to the bullet from the dead man. He relied once again on dowels to point him in the right direction. With luck, they'd lead him to a bullet.
We have evidence that the shots were fired at an angle where they entered a little bit higher than they exited. You also note that the metal on this side, that there's an indentation here, that the actual metal folds inside, which is indicative of this being where the bullet entered. And on the other side, we have evidence of the bullet exiting, where the metal fold is actually folding towards the outside. So this is indicative of the bullet exiting. So we're going to take this dowel rod here and we're going to reconstruct the trajectory. In other words, the flight path of the bullet from the time it struck the 55-gallon drum until it exits. Again, you can see the actual metal around the periphery of the hole, and the fact that it's folded out is indicative that this is an exit. So this would demonstrate that this bullet, continuing in a straight flight path, would most likely have hit the grass somewhere in here. So what we're going to have to do is focus our search on this area. We're going to have to conduct a grid search.
Vaughn and detectives spread out to find a bullet. Despite their thoroughness, they found nothing. Perhaps the barrel had been moved since the shots were fired through it. If so, metal detectors would be required to search a larger area. Then one of the deputy sheriffs had an idea. Perhaps the shooters had been burning logs in the barrel while using it as a target. Maybe the bullets were in the nearby pile of ashes. He sifted through the cinders and found what he was looking for. If Richard Vaughn could prove the bullet came from the same gun that killed the elderly man, he'd have the break he needed. When the man died in a picnic ground in Bloomingdale, Illinois on July 4th, police had only two clues: the bullet recovered at autopsy and the wound it left behind. Now, ballistic examiner Richard Vaughn had a second bullet, found near the 55-gallon drum. A comparison of the bullets would tell him if they came from the same gun. Every Ruger Red Hawk Magnum leaves similar rifling marks on a bullet. 6 lands and grooves with a right-hand twist. But every gun also leaves its own unique individual signature on the bullets it fires, produced by tiny irregularities in the rifling. The bullet found in the drum was deformed by the impact, but Vaughn was still able to discern a series of distinguishing marks. They were enough to conclude it came from the same weapon that killed the victim. The net was closing in, but an important question remained. Could a bullet fired from the backyard travel unobstructed for nearly a half-mile to the picnic grounds? Vaughn enlisted the help of an engineering firm to survey the bullet's likely path. They recorded ground elevations and the positions and heights of every house and tree between the Lawrence Avenue residence and the picnic grounds. Then they constructed a diagram.
The red line here demonstrates the calculated trajectory of the fatal bullet. The dark line here demonstrates the terrain. We do have documented here the dwellings that fell within the line of the trajectory of the fatal bullet. What we were able to determine was that this particular residence, for example, the bullet went directly to the right of it. But this indicates where the barrel of the firearm was. This is the fence that was at the back of the property, of the suspect's property. and this is the area where the decedent was seated.
On its half-mile journey to the picnic grounds were many potential obstacles. Amazingly, the bullet missed every one. But would it still possess enough power to kill once it got there? To make his case, Vaughn had to prove it could. He turned to wound ballistics expert Martin Fackler, who had devised a standardized way to test how far a bullet penetrates human flesh when traveling at various speeds. The depth of the wound depends on the velocity of the bullet. To simulate the penetrating power of a bullet after a half-mile flight, some gunpowder is removed to slow it down to between 400 and 700 feet per second.
This is referred to as a bullet inertia puller, and we're going to use this to pull and separate the bullet from the cartridge case so that we are able to actually remove the gunpowder from the cartridge case. Now that the bullet has been separated,
Vaughn carefully tips out a measured amount of the gunpowder. It's a trial and error process. Empty out some powder, fire around. Measure the bullet's speed. If it's too high, remove a little more gunpowder. If it's too low, remove a little less from the next round. To ensure that the bullet impacts the block at the intended velocity, its speed is measured with an electronic timer.
This is a chronograph. This is used to measure the speed of a moving projectile. It is nothing more than a timer, and the timer is started by the shadow of a bullet passing between these first two rods, and the timer is stopped by the shadow of the bullet passing between the second two rods. The speed in feet per second of the projectile is then recorded in the front of the machine.
Finally, when everything is set, the test bullet is fired into the gelatin.
Firing in the hole.
The bullet traveled 15 inches, almost identical to the depth of the fatal wound. What's more, like the bullet found in the victim, it had not deformed. The test proved that the bullet had enough power to kill the man from a half-mile away. Further evidence that the shot had been fired from Lawrence Avenue. The results of Vaughn's test gave Assistant State's Attorney Joe Burkett grounds to serve a search warrant on Robert Logsdon, resident of the home where the drum was found. Logsdon admitted he and his girlfriend held a party on July 4th. But at first, he denied owning a handgun. As a convicted felon, it was illegal for him to possess one.
He lied about virtually everything until he was confronted with facts that were known to us that we had put in the warrant, and he ultimately confessed and implicated his girlfriend as well in the shooting. There's a man who's dead.
Under pressure from Burkett, Logsdon produced a .44 caliber Strum Ruger Red Hawk. He later confessed and revealed the events of his party. It had started ordinarily enough, a barbecue for a few close friends. Sometime in the afternoon, Logsdon had gone into the house to fetch his Ruger Red Hawk. A jug of water was placed on the 55-gallon drum as a target. Logsdon fired off 5 rounds. 1 hit the jug, but 4 missed and hit the drum instead. Then he handed the gun to his girlfriend, whose shot missed the jug and drum completely. From Logsdon's statement, Vaughn determined that the girlfriend fired the fatal bullet. Because she was shorter than Logsdon, she tilted the gun higher. The increased angle gave the bullet a trajectory high enough to reach the picnic grounds. Logsdon pleaded guilty to unlawful use of a handgun, to possessing a stolen weapon, and to involuntary manslaughter. His girlfriend also admitted firing the gun and likewise pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter. Logsdon was sentenced to 6 years. His girlfriend received 90 days plus probation.
It was really just a tremendously successful investigation because, as with any murder or any homicide, police police officers and prosecutors don't take holidays. We worked closely with the Sheriff's Office, the Coroner's Office, Bloomingdale Police Department, Sergeant Vaughn and the Crime Lab. Everybody did an excellent job.
In Bloomingdale, victim and killer were completely unaware of each other's existence and were a half-mile apart. It took the tools of forensic science and the dedication of law enforcement professionals and ballistics experts to bridge the gap. The Bloomingdale death was a tragic accident caused by carelessness and an astonishing twist of fate. Its randomness made it a challenge to solve. In Chicago, during the turbulent 1960s, an investigator struggled with a different challenge. A political activist lay dead. Was he killed in self-defense or assassinated? The bullet-riddled walls held the answer. December 4th, 1969, 4:45 a.m. 14 police officers, handpicked by Illinois State Attorney Edward Hanrahan, approached an apartment in Chicago's Oak Park area, the heart of the city's black ghetto. They were about to embark on what would become one of the most controversial events in Chicago's history. The first-floor apartment was occupied by members of the Black Panther Party, a militant left-wing organization that preached social revolution. As the main group of police entered the front, a smaller force came in at the back. 15 minutes later, the tiny two-bedroom apartment was laced with 100 bullets. When the smoke cleared, 2 young Panthers were dead. 4 more were injured, 2 of them seriously. 2 policemen received superficial wounds. The raid yielded a cache of arms, 19 guns and boxes of ammunition. Among the dead was Fred Hampton, age 21, the charismatic leader of the Panthers' Illinois chapter.
Black people need some peace. White people need some peace. And we are going to have to fight. We're going to have to struggle. We're going to have to struggle relentlessly to bring about some peace.
Hampton was the 28th Black Panther killed by police in less than 2 years. The Black Panthers emerged in Oakland, California, a product of the 1960s social unrest. While black leaders such as Martin Luther King advocated civil disobedience and political action to advance civil rights, the Panthers seemed prepared to use violence if necessary. The December 4th raid quickly became a media event, as the Panthers and the authorities gave radically different accounts of what happened. Hanrahan claimed the police were serving a legitimate search warrant when the Panthers started shooting.
When the police officers announced their office, they were fired upon.
In a filmed demonstration, the police gave their account of the raid. In this version, Panther Mark Clark was sitting in a chair in the living room. He fired a shotgun through the front door as police approached. Police then burst in and shot him dead. As more Panthers began shooting, the exchange escalated.
There were 3 shots fired from the rear bedroom. They were directed directly at the back door as I was coming in. I backed out again.
According to police, when they entered Hampton's bedroom, they found him in bed, lying on his stomach. He opened fire with a .45 caliber automatic and a shotgun. In self-defense, they shot him twice in the head. But the Black Panthers told a different tale. The police burst in without warning, started shooting, and killed Mark Clark, who fired only after being fired upon. No other Panther used a weapon. More police stormed in from the back, found Fred Hampton asleep, and shot him twice in the head before he had a chance to wake up. Hampton's girlfriend was in bed with him when the raid began.
Still half asleep, I looked up and I saw bullets coming from, it looked like the front of the apartment, from the kitchen area. They were, pigs were just shooting. When he looked up, Just looked up. He didn't say a word, and he didn't move, except for moving his head up. He laid his head back down to the side like that. He never said a word, and he never got up out the bed.
The Panthers were convinced that Fred Hampton was assassinated and that police had launched a full-scale cover-up. Panther lawyer Skip Andrew acted as their spokesman.
Anyone who went through that apartment and examined the evidence that was remaining there could come to only one conclusion, and that is that Fred Hampton, 21 years old and a member of a militant, well-known militant group, was murdered in his bed, probably as he lay asleep.
Police arrested the surviving Panthers and charged them with several offenses, including attempted murder. To defend the Panthers, their lawyers needed evidence to support their version of the raid. They turned to ballistics expert Herbert McDonnell. He seemed an unlikely choice. More than once, he had investigated gunfights between the police and black radical groups. He usually sided with the police.
I understood it was a shootout, similar to the ones I'd investigated before in the Republic of New Africa and Fred Ahmed Evans and others. So I expected this would be another black militant group who were in the wrong and the police were in the right.
As McDonnell saw his role, it was to decide whether the police or the Panther account of the raid was nearer the truth. To determine this, he would have to reconstruct the raid from bullet holes and spent bullets in the apartment. It would take all of McDonnell's skill to find out what happened. He entered the apartment through a small foyer, which led to the living room. Mark Clark, the first Panther to die, had been shot here. Beyond the living room were two bedrooms. Fred Hampton had died in the farther one. Finally, at the back, lay the kitchen, through which the rear contingent of Hanrahan's force had entered. McDonnell started his investigation in the living room.
I spent 10.5 hours collecting evidence, taking photographs, and observing the trajectories of various bullets. I had never seen an area that had been so shot up as the living room. On one wall, the south wall, there were 45 bullet holes of various calibers. The larger ones were .45 caliber fired from a Thompson submachine gun. There were blasts from shotguns, and there were .30 caliber and .38. Having different sizes made it somewhat easy to establish which were fired from various weapons.
Who had fired these shots, the Panthers or the police? McDonnell hoped his investigation would provide the answer. As streams of sightseers trooped through the apartment, McDonnell set to work, unpacking the simple tools of his trade: a camera, notebook, ruler, and a ball of string. Soon he made a curious request.
I asked if I could have some straws brought in and some dowels. The Panthers went out, some of them, and they came back very quickly with a big handful of straws and a bundle of dowels, small ones.
After measuring the precise position of every hole in the living room wall, McDonnell gently pushed the dowels and straws into them. By following the direction of a dowel, he could trace the path of a bullet. The straws protected the holes, ensuring that a dowel did not knock out plaster and destroy vital evidence. When he finished, the result was startling. All 45 bullets had been fired from the vicinity of the living room door. All must have come from the police as they burst into the room.
When I began looking at the number of bullet holes, it became apparent that the vast majority seemed to be coming into the apartment rather than going out.
The investigation seemed to be favoring the Panthers' version of the raid, but the police were quick to state their case. In an interview with the Chicago Tribune, Hanrahan produced a photograph of bullet holes in the molding around the back door. He called it irrefutable evidence that the Panthers had fired at the police as they entered from the rear of the apartment. Reporters studied the photos.
One of the 4 pictures you gave the Tribune had 2 bullet holes on the right side of what was supposed to be the rear door.
But when reporters inspected the apartment, they found the marks to be not holes, but nails. Hanrahan backpedaled.
I have said that we released the pictures. We have not characterized or described the conditions that they portray, other than to say that that is an accurate portrayal of that particular object.
Now the police changed their story. The Panther bullets, they said, whistled through the open door. That is not what McDonnell found.
The claims that there were bullets fired out at the police, out the back door, are unfounded. There is no way the bullets could not have hit a person in the door, and if they missed them, they would have struck a brick wall.
McDonnell continued his investigation in the front bedroom, where he discovered bullets fired in the living room had passed through the wall. While in the bedroom, he noticed the door was also pierced by bullets. He counted 25 of them. The police had claimed Panthers in the bedroom shot at them and refused to stop firing despite orders from officers. At first sight, the door seemed to confirm this part of the police's story. All the shots in the door came from the inside out, exactly what would be expected if Panthers in the bedroom had been shooting at the police. But there was a puzzle. None of those 25 shots hit an officer, nor was there any trace of them in the hallway beyond.
But on closer examination, if those bullets were fired when the door was closed, as was claimed by the police, they would have struck the hall right across from that bedroom door. There was not one point of impact there. So having the dowels between the living room and that bedroom recessed, I could open the door all the way, and then all I had to do was to push the dowels from the living room side, and out of the 25 holes in the door, 25 were explained by the bullets coming from the living room when the door was wide open.
When these shots had been fired, he concluded, the bedroom door was open, roughly parallel to the bedroom wall. Bullets fired by the police in the living room passed through the wall, then continued on through the door. By now, the evidence was overwhelming. Of all the bullets fired, only one, a shotgun blast in the living room door, seemed to have been fired by a Black Panther. This was beginning to look like a very one-sided gunfight.
There were at least 99 fired in. So when you have 99 to 1, it's not a shootout. It's a shoot-in.
But what happened in the back bedroom when Hampton lost his life? Was he waiting in bed, ready to fire, as police claimed? Or was he asleep and murdered in cold blood by the police, as the Panthers insisted? The trajectory of the bullets through his skull might solve the riddle. On January 3, 1970, a federal grand jury ordered Hampton's body exhumed. 2 earlier autopsies had given conflicting results. One, conducted by the Cook County coroner, reported that the 2 bullets in his head came from opposite directions. That suggested he was awake and moving. Hampton's relatives arranged a second one by a private pathologist. He found that both bullets had struck from the right and traveled on roughly parallel paths, suggesting Hampton was lying down. The new autopsy confirmed the second one regarding the trajectory. Both shots had entered Hampton's head from the right. The findings supported the Black Panther's claim that Hampton had been asleep, lying on his back with his head down.
From the trajectory into the head of Fred Hampton, both shots were fired in nearly parallel trajectories which projected back to the doorway. So if one policeman came in and fired a shot, Fred would have still been lying in that position when the second person came in with a different caliber and fired a second shot at what probably was either a dead or dying person.
McDonnell's meticulous investigation and the autopsy supported the Panther version of events. It looked as if the police had indeed assassinated Fred Hampton. But the most crucial question had not yet been answered. Did the Panthers or the police fire first? If the Panthers had started the shooting, even if they had fired just a single shot, the police could maintain they shot back only in self-defense. To answer this question, McDonald performed his most dazzling piece of detective work. The gunfight evidently had started as the police stormed the living room. McDonald found that the living room door contained 2 bullet holes. His examination of powder marks and wood splinters established that one bullet came from outside, from a police .38 revolver. He recovered the bullet from the living room wall. A second, larger hole likely came from Mark Clark's shotgun. After blasting a hole in the door panel, the slug had gone through a wall and ended up in the stairwell outside the apartment. McDonald had an idea. By figuring out how far the door was open when the .38 bullet and the shotgun slug passed through it, he might be able to tell who shot first. He traced the bullets' paths as they flew through the door. He knew that, by their own admission, the police had forced open the door as the raid began. He threaded a string through the .38 caliber hole in the door to the .38 hole in the wall. Then he adjusted the door until the string was straight. The door was barely ajar. Next, he ran a line from the slug hole in the stairwell through the hole in the door and then to Mark Clark's chair. This time, when the string was pulled straight, the door was 3/4 open. Through his experiments, McDonald pieced together the scenario. As police pushed open the door at the start of the raid, they fired the .38. As it swung open further, a Panther shotgun went off.
That was the only evidence of any shot being fired out.
McDonald's conclusion was clear. The police fired first. According to McDonald's findings, the police broke in, firing a .38 caliber pistol as they slammed open the living room door. A Panther, presumably Mark Clark, returned the fire. As the fusillade of police bullets poured into the apartment, Panthers fled to the second bedroom, where they tried in vain to awaken Fred Hampton. When the police reached the bedroom, they shot Hampton twice in the head. In court, charges against the surviving 7 Black Panthers were eventually dropped. No indictments were ever handed down against State Attorney Hanrahan or the 14 officers involved in the raid. But Hanrahan's credibility had been tarnished, and his political career was ruined. 12 years later, in a civil suit brought by the Panther survivors, the raiders were found liable, and the city ordered to pay $1.8 million in damages. McDonald's detailed investigation helped to tip the scales and ensure that in the end, justice was done. It's been 30 years since Fred Hampton's death, but today, crime solving takes as much tenacity and ingenuity as ever. Investigators are finding a new ally in the computer. It's proving time and again that a criminal's past can catch up with him. On March 8, 1996, a young boy was spending the evening as any 12-year-old would, when tragedy struck. A gang war simmered on the streets of his New Orleans neighborhood. The boy became a casualty of that war, a bullet in his head from a senseless drive-by shooting. Within minutes, police and paramedics were on the scene. They rushed to save the boy's life, but from the start, the prognosis looked grim. Homicide detectives from the New Orleans Police Department began interviewing eyewitnesses. 2 men who had run for safety when the drive-by occurred returned to the scene. One of them was the victim's uncle. The men admitted to police that they were the intended victims. They recognized the car and identified the triggerman as Kevin Jordan, a gang member and drug dealer. Meanwhile, the child was taken to the hospital. 15 hours later, he died. As the search for Kevin Jordan started, Sergeant Michael Rice and John Treadaway, firearms examiner for the New Orleans police, began their own quest. 2 bullets had been found at the crime scene, and a third had been recovered from the little boy. Could they link those bullets to a gun and then link that gun to the killer?
The bullet was placed in our evidence room and it was delivered to the firearms section for me to examine. Examining the bullet, I found that it was a .38 caliber having a 6 right rifling twist.
Most drive-by shootings involve semi-automatic handguns, but this bullet was fired from a revolver.
So I was able to inform the Detective Bureau that the gun that was used was a .38 caliber revolver.
But were all 3 bullets fired from the same .38? To find out, Treadaway had to compare the fine details of each one.
So, do you see how pronounced this is? If you look up on the monitor in the groove, you can see about 2/3 of the way down it's a good match. It matches on the following land and the following groove. This is a hit, no doubt at all. This is both bullets fired from the same weapon, no doubt.
Okay. And I think this is what they needed.
Now, detectives in the field knew that only a single .38 revolver had been used. Until they found it, there was little more that Treadaway could do.
Open the door, please.
Detectives, meanwhile, learned the name of the driver. He was Henry Talley. They also found out he owned a .38 caliber revolver. On March 16th, they arrived at Talley's home, armed with search warrants. A search turned up drug paraphernalia, marijuana, crack cocaine, and 3 guns, including his .38 caliber revolver. He was taken in for questioning. Talley's weapons were confiscated and sent to Treadaway at the ballistics laboratory. Could he tie the .38 revolver to the bullet that killed the boy? If so, the police could build a solid case against Talley and the alleged triggerman, Kevin Jordan, who had already been arrested on suspicion of murder. The first order of business was testing for fingerprints. Had Talley or Jordan last fired the gun and left prints on the trigger? Timothy Susano, a fingerprint expert with New Orleans Police Department, demonstrates how he finds them. Latent fingerprints, prints invisible to the naked eye, are developed in a 2-stage process. The first involves fumigating with superglue. Molecules of the glue will stick to a print.
And you want to take your liquid superglue and pour it into the aluminum dish. Next, I'm going to place the aluminum dish onto a hot plate that's located inside this tank. That's going to heat the superglue and accelerate the fuming process.
Within an hour, the gun is cooked. Now it's ready for the second stage of the test. It's washed with a fluorescent dye. If any prints exist, the dye will adhere to them and become visible under the ultraviolet light source. Unfortunately, none showed up on the .38 found at Talley's residence. The test could not help pin the shooting on Talley or Jordan. Still, the test is often worth performing. Sometimes it can yield dramatic results.
This is an example of a partial latent fingerprint that was developed on the trigger guard of a weapon that was used in a murder. As you can see, the partial fingerprint right here, that's on the front part of the trigger guard, which is located right here.
To establish a connection between Talley's gun and the fatal bullet, Treadaway needed to inspect a bullet shot from the gun.
This is our ballistic recovery room. In this room is our ballistic tank that we test fire our weapons in. This is Officer Gwen Surpass. He's going to test fire these weapons.
We're going to test fire this 38 first. Before we do anything with it, we normally like to check to make sure that the weapon is functional. We make sure that there are no obstructions in the barrel and all the parts on the weapon are in place. I'm going to go ahead and load it. We're going to need to put some ear protection on. It gets a little loud in here.
The gun is fired into an 800-gallon tank of water, informally called the hot tub. Water halts the bullet without distorting its shape or marking its surface.
Once the weapon's fired, I then unload the weapon, remove the spent casings.
The bullet retrieval system is simple but effective. A broom handle and a lump of silly putty. Once the bullet was recovered, its markings were examined and compared with bullets found at the crime scene. The match was undeniable.
So I performed my test fire and examined the bullet, the test bullet, under the microscope with the 3 bullets that I received previously and determined that that gun had fired those 3 bullets.
Tally's gun had indeed shot the little boy. Both Tally and Jordan were convicted felons, and by now the New Orleans police had enough evidence to charge Jordan with murder. But they suspected that the guns found in Tally's house had been used in other crimes. Could a new computer system implicate Tally in past crimes? When the 12-year-old boy died in a drive-by shooting in 1996, New Orleans police had a brand new crime-solving tool available. Earlier that year, they installed the Integrated Ballistic Identification System, or IBIS. It dramatically speeds up the time it takes to match bullets from crime scenes to guns confiscated by police. Sergeant Michael Rice runs the IBIS operation. For him, it's a vast improvement from the old method.
We would go and physically get these guns and test fire them and examine them on the microscope. Well, right now, with our IBIS system, we can now simply, as a matter of routine, test fire these weapons and put them into IBIS. This image will then be correlated and checked against all of our current database. And if this gun had been used in a crime, we will know about it in a very short period of time, perhaps within the hour.
At the heart of IBIS is a sophisticated computer program linked to an elaborate microscope. Attached to the microscope are 2 tiny video cameras. When a test bullet is placed under one of the cameras, its magnified image appears on the screen. Greg McCrae is one of the New Orleans detectives trained to use the new system.
We have the projectile, the bullet itself, mounted on a little fixture with the information recorded on it. It's glued on here. We're going to mount it to the machine, rotate it and lock it in.
At the flip of a switch, the cradle begins to move, turning the bullet through one complete revolution, scanning an image of the bullet into the computer.
As you can see, you see striations, you see groovings, you see markings. As we move it down, we'll take a picture of it. The machine digitizes this picture as it takes it. Now, when we process it, the picture is taken and then processed digitally from this machine into the next machine, the next computer, which will in turn correlate it.
Built into IBIS is a program designed to scan each image for its distinctive pattern of marks or lines. Having picked it out, the program searches through its database looking for other images of bullets that match. Within less than a minute, it can scrutinize thousands of bullets. a task that would take a ballistics expert like John Treadaway years to perform. This part of IBIS is called bulletproof. A second subsystem, Brass Catcher, enables him to scan and match spent shells.
The casing, which is the other section of the bullet, would be put in this area here and locked in here and secured. This particular microscope will take a picture with the camera mounted up here of the back end, or I should say the breech face of that casing. The breech face and also the firing pin, which is in this area right here.
Now the computer records the shell's distinctive features, the positions and shapes of indentations left by the firing pin and tiny gouges left as it's ejected from the weapon. The operation is completed in 2 to 3 minutes. IBIS had been installed less than a month when a bullet from the .38 revolver that killed the 12-year-old boy was entered into it. There were no hits, no matches with the thousands of other bullets in the computer's database. But the system's real power was demonstrated with bullets test-fired from a second gun, a .45 caliber automatic found in Henry Talley's apartment.
The firing pin, which we're looking at, if you look very closely, you can see this duck image right here, center in the firing pin itself.
But this is very clear. We knew from looking at the screen that the probability of a match was very, very high.
IBIS made a hit, implicating Henry Talley in another unsolved drive-by shooting. It was enough to strengthen the case against him regarding the death of the child. IBIS had proved itself on its first case.
Prior to IBIS, this case would have probably been unsolved. It would have never picked up any additional follow-up unless there was a specific reason for it. We have uncovered and linked many cases involving homicides as well as shootings here in the city. And we made those links and those correlations and tied them all together by simply what Greg's doing right now. And we're kind of proud of what we do here, and I would not want to be without IBIS today.
The death of the 12-year-old boy was solved partly by traditional ballistics work. But without the IBIS computer system, police would never have connected Talley's weapons to another crime that might have otherwise gone unsolved. Both Kevin Jordan and Henry Talley were convicted of first-degree murder and are now serving life sentences. By developing new ways to trace bullets to guns and guns to criminals, forensic detectives are increasingly able to turn a criminal's own ammunition against him. So long as there's a bullet, there's a clue. And so long as there's a clue, there's a chance to catch a killer.
She came to rest on a snowbank at the side of a highway. A teenage girl who could have been anyone's daughter. Her journey had taken her places no young girl should ever know. But finally, it had brought her home to a small Pennsylvania town she'd never seen before. If only she'd survived, she would finally have known there were people who cared.
She appeared on the highway in the spring, a young woman, her life cut short, her past and her identity a mystery. Only by finding out who she was could we ever hope to find her killer. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The highway gave the killer a quick and easy escape route, but the trail the FBI used to pursue him was twisted and long. We hoped it wouldn't be a dead end.
March 24th, 1993, Bellefonte, Pennsylvania. A late snowstorm had held spring at arm's length. On his way to work, a motorist drove down a quiet, snow-lined roadway. But something on the roadside caught his attention. What he saw was unthinkable in this peaceful valley. Pennsylvania State Police were immediately called in. A young woman lay dead on a snowbank near the junction of two major interstates.
What do we got here?
The county coroner determined the girl had died before she was dumped there. She was wearing only socks, panties, and a sweater. And she was young, high school or college age. But perhaps most disturbing, there was a rope knotted around her neck. And her hands were also bound. District Attorney Ray Griecar was at the scene, appalled by what he saw.
What struck me is that someone had not only murdered this young woman, but treated her with such disrespect. The way her body was found haphazardly askew on this pile of snow suggested that she had been just thrown out as if she were nothing more than a piece of refuse along the side of the road. And it's something that makes you angry when you see it.
Her body was taken away for an autopsy. Soon word of the crime began to spread in this close-knit town of 7,000. It was the first homicide in Bellefonte in 13 years. Like District Attorney Griecar, the townspeople were shocked and outraged. FBI Special Agent Randy Kohik was among them. He was drawn to the case well before the FBI was officially involved.
That whole area up there is known as Happy Valley. It's a nice place to raise your kids. I lived there for 12 years. The crimes like this just don't happen there. And needless to say, to have a young girl's body dumped in your community is a heinous thing. They were extremely upset, and even more so, they wondered whether or not perhaps the murderer might live in the community.
Detectives searched for anything that might help identify the girl. They found no purse or wallet, and little else.
And I remember commenting to Trooper Madden that morning that he would be very, very fortunate indeed if he was ever able to even identify this young woman, let alone figure out who murdered her.
Trooper Madden of the Pennsylvania State Police would be lead investigator.
There was a slight indentation into the snow, about 6 inches, where the body itself looked like it had been dumped off of some type of object, be it a truck or vehicle, into the berm of the snow.
Madden surmised the vehicle had been a truck with a cab fairly high off the ground. Tire tracks nearby would prove him right. They were made by dual wheels, probably the rear wheels of a tractor-trailer cab. An evidence technician made plaster casts of the tracks to be sent to the Pennsylvania State Police lab. Examiners there would attempt to identify the brand and check for anything unusual about them. Then, if a suspect were found and his tires matched the tracks, the casts could help link him to the scene of the crime. Troopers fanned out to find clues. They searched both nearby fields and local Penn State University, but found nothing useful. The body was taken to Lehigh Hospital in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. There, coroner Dr. Mahalakis would perform the autopsy, as Trooper Madden observed. The doctor determined the cause of death to be strangulation. There were no gunshot or stab wounds. The body's core temperature revealed the young woman had been dead less than 12 hours when her body was discovered. It seemed she had died some time before she was dumped on the roadside, as the coroner at the scene had guessed. Other tests indicated she had had sex before she died.
Whether she was raped or had consensual sex at the time was not known. However, based on the circumstances, we believed at the time that a rape may have occurred.
Dr. Mahalakis carefully removed the rope from around the girl's neck.
Wait a minute, right here, Doc. There's a piece of hair, this black hair.
Under the knot was a single dark hair. It didn't belong to this blonde girl. But was it the killer's? The hair would be sent to the FBI forensics lab in Washington, D.C., along with the knots for analysis. The type of knots could be important. They might help the FBI develop a profile of the killer. But the best clue came from the girl's left hand. There appeared to be something written on the palm.
She had some faint numbers written on the palm of her left hand. They had been written on possibly in ink, and they'd been on there for some time as they had faded, and they were barely legible. It was thought by both Bill and myself that possibly this could be the lead we were looking for that could possibly lead us to her identity.
Numbers,
the writing was
letters.
indecipherable, though it looked like it might be numbers.
That's pretty faint. Can you get that?
Agent Kohig suggested experts at the FBI lab could make them clear enough to read.
It was thought that perhaps we could have these enhanced by the FBI lab in Washington, D.C., so the skin was removed from her left hand and it was forwarded to the FBI lab.
The girl's fingerprints would be run through a national database of missing persons. But the results would prove disheartening.
Checks were made with her fingerprints through the APHIS system, which is a national system of checking fingerprints. They came back negative. Checks were also made using descriptors of the body and characteristics of the body, and that also came back negative. So we had no record of a person missing that matched this person we discovered.
Then, x-rays were taken by a forensic dentist. They could be crucial in identifying the woman. If a tentative ID were made and these x-rays matched those taken when the woman was alive, they'd confirm her identity. But first, she'd need to be visually identified by someone who knew her in life, which would be difficult after a full autopsy. Closing facial incisions made for the dental x-rays and masking contusions would take hours of painstaking work. To restore her to the way she looked in life would require the artistry of a skilled mortician. Stephen Mondock was just the man for the job.
When we received her body, she'd been through quite an ordeal. You know, we had to put a little bit of makeup on her. We had to get her hair done. We dressed her. We made her look as lifelike as possible at that point. We then proceeded to take photographs that were eventually placed in the newspaper.
Those photographs depicted her as more lifelike than she had looked when first found. But Mondock gave her more than a face. He gave her a name.
When the coroner brought her in, He said, we have a Jane Doe for you. And I said, Kerry, I said, you know, I don't like calling people Jane Doe. I said, it seems so impersonal. He says, well, what are we going to call her? And I said, well, she was found in Spring Township, right? He said, yes. I said, why don't we call her Spring? And I said, well, she was found in the dawn of the morning, so why don't we call her Spring Dawn?
Mondok's caring work gave investigators exactly what they needed. They showed photos of the girl to dozens of truckers at local truck stops, restaurants, and gas stations. Some offered the names of people the girl resembled. Her young face struck a chord of recognition in many who saw it. Notices in local papers and on flyers also generated leads.
The outpouring of calls to the state police at the time was plentiful, and we had to sift through every lead to try to determine if this person was a local person.
But none of the leads would pan out. Then, in late April, about a month after the body was found, the FBI lab called Trooper Madden. Their analysis showed the writing on the girl's left palm was a phone number with a Florida area code. Madden found the number had been disconnected, and he began to wonder if the area code itself was wrong.
But it didn't seem right. It didn't seem to fit this particular case. In looking at this person, there was no tan. It seemed as if she came from a winterized area, somewhat similar to where we were. However, we did not know where.
Madden's best guess was that she came from west or north of Pennsylvania, probably within a 12-hour drive from where the body was found. Madden also realized that there were 2 phone numbers written on the girl's hand, not just one. So he noted all the cities within the 12-hour radius that had both the exchanges she'd written down. Madden and Kohik would send the numbers along with photos and descriptions of the young woman to sheriffs and state police in those areas. Perhaps the information would trigger some leads. As they worked the case, the people of Bellefonte followed each new development, offering help and support.
There was a genuine showing of affection for this person and concern. I guess you could say she was posthumously adopted by the community of Bellefonte. And even though we were very quickly able to ascertain that she was not a local resident, there was still a very strong sense of she is someone that we cared about.
As spring bloomed for Bellefonte, the girl remained in people's thoughts. Her story touched everyone, especially Madden and Kohik. These colleagues and longtime friends could not stop thinking about her tragic death and trying to solve the case even after hours.
You can't let the town down.
At the time I was assigned to this case, I had a 17-year-old daughter, and Detective Madden had 2 teenage daughters. So I think for the both of us, we took a very strong personal interest in the case. As a matter of fact, it pretty much took up all of our time during our working hours, and we would often find ourselves talking to each other at night on the phone at our residences.
Never was community support so strong as when Stephen Mondok began to prepare the body for burial.
I had florists call donating flowers. I had hairdressers calling to do her hair. I had people donating clothing. I had ministers willing to give their services, the vault company, the casket companies. The cemetery where she was to be buried was actually at the bottom of a beautiful mountain where there's wildflowers growing. We had the monument company had was willing to donate a stone to bury her. It was just amazing how much the town all came together in an effort to bury her.
More than a month after the body was found, it was time for a burial. Not only did the town want to bring closure to the tragedy, the body could not be preserved much longer. Still, Madden needed just a little more time.
The last thing that we wanted to do as a police agency was to lose the body. In other words, we did not want the body buried at that point in time without identification.
Just when the body could be kept no longer, a break in the case finally came. A sheriff's office in Maine received Madden's information packet on the girl.
See what you think.
Though he didn't recognize her face, he called one of the numbers written on the girl's hand. He had no idea who might answer the phone.
Yes, hello, this is Sheriff.
He reached Mark Rosenberg, a guidance counselor at a local school. Promising, given the girl's age.
I'm Detective Staples. Thanks so much for meeting with me tonight.
A detective visited Rosenberg and his wife at their home.
I'd like to see if you can help me identify the woman in this.
When the detective showed the Rosenbergs a photo of the girl, they immediately recognized her.
Can you look at that for me, please?
And when they spoke her name, it was eerily familiar. Dawn Marie Birnbaum. Steve Mondock's choice of the name Spring Dawn had been uncannily accurate.
And I was shocked. I was amazed. It was just a strange coincidence. But it felt right. She was part of our community.
Mark Rosenberg was one of the last people Dawn talked to before she died. Investigators hoped he could lead them closer to her killer. After a search that stretched from Florida to Maine, investigators had learned the identity of a teenage girl found dead near a rural Pennsylvania interstate. As they spoke to Mark Rosenberg, a guidance counselor at the school she had attended, he said she'd called him just days before she died, from a payphone. He'd tried to help her, but it was already too late. The school she attended was mainly for at-risk teens, like Dawn herself. She'd had problems with authority figures ever since her parents' divorce. In Indiana, where her mother lived, she'd been through a dozen foster homes and run away almost as many times. But at this boarding school, she'd finally found someone she could trust, her counselor, Mr. Rosenberg.
As Mr. Rosenberg was talking to Dawn, the operator was interrupting, telling her to put more money in. Time was running out, and Mr. Rosenberg told Dawn to call him again so he would know she was safe. She said she would do that. He gave her his home telephone number, which obviously she then wrote on the palm of her hand. She said she'd call back, but in fact, she never did call again.
The school would send Dawn's dental records to Pennsylvania, where forensic dentists would match them to x-rays taken at the morgue. The result would be a positive ID and a turning point in the case.
The FBI entered the case officially under our kidnapping statute. Obviously, we had a girl who was found in central Pennsylvania laying in a snow pile, tied up, and who had previously been seen just a few days earlier in the state of Maine. So we have the interstate aspect.
Now, we are aware that
the investigation focused in Maine, where Dawn was last seen alive. Maine state police officers interviewed Dawn's friends, including Heidi Hansen. Heidi told them Dawn had been planning to hitch a ride with a truck driver, as she'd done about a year before. On that occasion, Dawn and another friend, Mandy Gray, had run off with a trucker named John Hoffpower. They dropped off Mandy at her home in Georgia, then continued on. What had started as a ride became a relationship. As the weeks passed, they grew closer.
And the woman of my life, Dawn. She's been waiting weeks to see you.
Hoffpower took Dawn home to meet his grandmother. They continued to travel together, driving his routes. No one knew exactly where they'd gone or what they'd done, but Dawn spoke fondly of her time with Hoffpower. They'd enjoyed each other's company, and he had treated her well. It seemed one of the few happy times in her troubled life. Then, about a month after Dawn was last seen, The truck was pulled over by police in a random traffic stop. An officer demanded Dawn get out. She complied. When she gave him her license, it triggered a missing persons bulletin filed by her school. The officer told Dawn she'd have to come with him. When he tried to take her away from Hoffpower, she pleaded to stay. To no avail. Police would bring her back to school. Since then, her behavior had been good, and she was due to graduate in just a few months. But things were not as they seemed. Apparently, Hoffpower was still in love with her, and maybe she with him. Though she hadn't seen him since their trip, he had tried to visit her at school.
Listen, I'm sorry, you can't get in here.
But security guards had kept him from entering the grounds.
You got no clearance to come in here.
Not having heard from him in a while, Dawn now told friends she was going to look for Hoffpower and run away with him again. On the evening of Sunday, March 21st, 3 days before Dawn was found dead, she had snuck off from a movie theater. She told her friend Heidi she would hitchhike to the Dysart truck stop in Bangor, Maine, hoping to meet Hoffpower.
Get 2 agents down there ASAP and get me all the information.
Hoffpower now became a prime suspect, since Dawn was last seen headed to meet him. Agent Kohick attempted to track him down. Apparently, he lived in Mississippi. But Hoffpower proved elusive. The closest relative agents found was his grandmother, who lived in Emory, Mississippi. She welcomed them inside and told them she'd raised Hoffpower as her own son. He was devoted to her. No matter where he was, he called her almost every day. He had even brought Dawn home to meet her. Now, when agents told the woman of Dawn's violent death, she was devastated. Then, she shared with them her own tragic news. Last September, a half year before Dawn's murder, her grandson had stopped calling her. He'd also stopped working and taking care of his pets. He'd left his wallet in his house and disappeared. His grandmother believed he was dead, though his body was never found.
His car was found riddled with bullets, and there was some reason to think that he had gotten into some trouble with some very unsavory characters and had met a violent end.
Agents learned his car had been found in September 1992, a few miles from his Mississippi home, 7 months prior to Dawn's death. By a strange twist of fate, Hoffpower's disappearance had led to Dawn's death. If Hoffpower had arrived at Dysart's, Dawn would still be alive. Their star-crossed love affair had ended in a double tragedy. Now, with Hoffpower presumed dead, investigators' struggle to find Dawn's killer was almost back to square one. Investigators' most promising lead had gone cold. They again had no suspect in a chilling case. The death of a beautiful 17-year-old girl left dead on a rural Pennsylvania roadside. On a tip from Dawn's friend, Agent Kohick and Trooper Madden went to the Dysart truck stop in Bangor, Maine, where Dawn had said she was headed when she was last seen.
Kohick from the FBI. How are you? I'm Detective Madden. I wonder if we could ask a few questions.
They showed Dawn's photograph to the cashier, who remembered seeing her on the telephone a few weeks earlier.
She was over there. Surprisingly enough, even though 2 months had elapsed, agents discovered that people recalled seeing the young blonde girl there standing at the doorway asking truckers for rides as they walked through. She was recalled by several people at the truck stop. And I guess when you know, you're a young teenage girl and you're out on the road like that, people take notice.
It seemed obvious. This was where Dawn had made her last phone calls.
This cashier's desk, where a trucker would pay for fuel, was only about 15 feet from the bank of pay telephones which Dawn had used to make calls back home and down to the school. So it was easy to visualize how an encounter would have occurred between Dawn and a trucker.
Agent Kohik secured a federal grand jury subpoena for the telephone records.
Got a problem? Yep, we have a lot of problems.
Going through them would be a painstaking task, but it was the most promising option in a case fast running out of leads.
Mandy, her girlfriend, right?
Mandy Gray.
Some of her other girlfriends?
The people Dawn had called might know where she had been going, or who she was going with.
You got it. ASAP.
The phone records confirmed Dawn's call to her guidance counselor, Mark Rosenberg, in Maine. They also revealed she'd phoned other friends. It seemed her last call was at 10 a.m. to Mandy Gray, the girl who'd traveled with Dawn and Hoffbauer. A state trooper visited Mandy at her home in Georgia. Mandy confirmed Dawn had called her from the Dysart's truck stop. Dawn said she'd gotten a ride to Dysart's from a friendly trucker who'd given her money for food when he'd dropped her off. Mandy said her friend had been disappointed that she hadn't found Hoffbauer there. She seemed to have no one else to turn to and nowhere to go. If she headed toward Indiana, where her mother lived, she feared authorities would be looking for her.
Based on the conversation she had had with her girlfriend in Georgia, Trooper Madden and I reasoned that she had obtained a ride with a truck driver from Dysart's truck stop. At that point, I decided it would be best if we attempted to identify who may have stopped there for gas over that several-day period. And so I had a federal grand jury subpoena issued for all the receipts from the truck stop for approximately a 4-day period surrounding when Dawn was last seen there.
Meanwhile, Trooper Madden obtained receipts for the 3 truck stops closest to where Dawn's body was found in Pennsylvania. They hoped that whoever had given Dawn a ride had bought gas in both places. It was possible. The distance from Bangor to Bellefonte is just over 650 miles, but not probable. A big rig can easily travel 1,500 miles or more on a single filling. Undoubtedly, it was a long shot, but Kohik and Madden nonetheless began the painstaking task of scanning thousands of gas receipts.
Over approximately the next 4 weeks, I compiled the receipts from Maine and from Pennsylvania and ended up with 2 separate lists. After comparing one list against the other, I noticed there was only one match on the entire list of several thousand names.
The name was James Robert Cruz Jr. Cruz had bought gas on the morning of March 22nd at Dysart's truck stop, just as Dawn was talking on the telephone 15 feet away. 3 days later, he gassed up again in Milesburg, Pennsylvania, just a few hours before Dawn's body was found nearby.
So this was a big breakthrough for us. We have a guy who's in Bangor when Dawn is in Bangor, and in central Pennsylvania right about the time her body is found.
The receipts showed James Robert Cruz Jr. worked at an Ohio trucking company. In response to a call from Agent Kohik, his manager verified the credit card purchases.
Okay, I've got the records.
Cruz was driving truck 44 on a route consistent with the events of the crime.
Got the times, got the dates, got everything here.
Agent Kohik and Trooper Madden now had a suspect in the killing of 17-year-old Dawn Marie Birnbaum.
Okay, that sounds good to me too. Exactly.
Investigators pursued their prime suspect, wanted for the murder of a 17-year-old high school girl whose body was dumped near a Pennsylvania interstate. The man was a trucker named James Robert Cruz Jr.
His manager told the FBI he was a model employee at an Ohio trucking company.
This is the file that we're
But
looking for.
investigators found he had a dark past.
Yeah, it turns
I had a criminal history check run in the next few minutes and was able to determine that he had a rather lengthy criminal record. Most importantly on that criminal record was the fact that he had been in the U.S. military, and while in the U.S. military, he had been convicted of attempted murder via strangulation and had served time in Fort Leavenworth for that conviction.
His military records gave investigators another key fact.
We found that his blood type was A positive, which fit him into the small portion of the population which would be a possible source of the seminal fluid found in Dawn.
It seemed investigators were closing in on their suspect.
There's only one thing left that we could do to further attempt to identify whether he might have been the individual responsible for this murder, and that was to make a determination as to what type of tires he had on his truck.
At Agent Cohick's request, an Ohio FBI agent inspected the tires on Truck 44, while Cruz was on the road in another rig. The tires were XD1, Michelin, low profiles, a fairly unusual brand. At the Pennsylvania State Police Lab, an examiner attempted to match that brand to the tire cast made where Dawn's body was found. He compared the cast to detailed photographs in a tire reference guide. They matched. Another breakthrough in the case.
So we had a match on the tires, we had a match on the blood, we had the fuel slips. This, at this point, according to the United States Attorney's Office, was sufficient to put together a search warrant to search Jim's truck and to also perhaps take blood and hair samples from his body for DNA analysis.
When Cruz was again away in another rig, FBI evidence recovery technicians examined Truck 44. But if Dawn had in fact been in this truck, it would have been at least 2 months ago, so investigators didn't expect to find much. The fact that the truck was exceptionally clean didn't make them any more optimistic.
The search took pretty much the entire day, and it was an exhaustive search. We were searching both the tractor and the trailer itself. There were over 300 pictures taken of the tractor trailer.
But nothing turned up. An evidence technician was about to declare the search complete when something caught the investigator's eye.
And I looked at the passenger door and noticed that at the bottom of the door there was a piece of carpeting. And upon closer examination of the carpeting, I noticed one single blonde head hair interwoven in the fibers of the carpet.
You see something?
It seemed amazing, but there
Tom,
it was,
Bill, come here.
as if Dawn had not been quite ready to give up yet.
What is it? It's like a blonde hair.
The hair would be sent to the FBI lab for analysis.
I thought it was a little bit too good to be true that this could be a hair from Dawn.
When do you expect them, Joe?
Now, investigators waited for Cruz to return from his run.
Mr. Cruz, James Cruz?
They told him they were looking for a runaway last seen at a truck stop in Bangor, Maine.
Do you mind if we use your office?
No, right there on it. Thanks, Joe.
They implied they were talking to many drivers.
Take a seat right here in the shed.
Yeah, we know you had a long
They asked to see Cruz's logbook for his record of travels on the days in question.
Sure.
The logs are government mandated to keep truckers from driving too many hours at a
Gives kind of a
time.
history of where you've been.
Cruz admitted he'd falsified his logs.
Is it pretty accurate?
Well, it's
Truckers commonly alter them to stay within legal limits.
Pretty accurately where you've been.
But it seemed Cruz's logs had been selectively altered.
But the one thing we noticed was that the misrepresentations in the log seemed to occur just conveniently when the fuel was purchased in Pennsylvania, also when the fuel was purchased in Dysert's.
I'm sorry?
In response to questions, Cruz calmly described his route.
Yeah, pretty much.
But when asked if he fueled up between Bangor and Pennsylvania, he said he didn't have to. The 240 gallons his truck could carry was enough for the trip.
Is this your signature on this credit card statement?
I then suggested to him that I had a fuel slip indicating that he had in fact filled up his truck on Wednesday morning. He paused for a second and then advised that he did in fact recall doing that, and it was due to the fact that they gave free showers away at that particular truck stop in Mossburg. I asked him why he hadn't remembered it, and he said to me, well, I guess I just forgot.
Mr. Cruz, we have a, we can show a picture of
Then they showed him a photo of Dawn.
We asked him if he had ever seen this girl before. At that point in time, he very calmly and casually stated no, he had never seen this girl, he didn't know her, nor had he ever met her before in his life.
They told him they had strong evidence linking him to the crime. Dawn's phone calls from Bangor that coincided with his stopover there.
Any problem with that?
The match of his truck tires to the tire tracks at the scene. And the match of his blood type to the type found on the body. He calmly chalked it all up to coincidence.
I don't know how.
At no point during the interview did any of his mannerisms indicate that he was at all nervous with my line of questioning. And as the night slowly went on, I think even Detective Madden agreed that he became less of a suspect for us, even though we had all this circumstantial evidence. He was just too calm and cooperative.
Do you have any problem with that? Not at all.
Cruz remained friendly, even when investigators produced a warrant for blood and hair samples. They would later learn from FBI profilers that such an excessively calm response can be a sign of guilt. On September 6th, results of the blood and hair analysis proved them right. The samples from Cruz matched the hair and DNA the killer had left behind on Dawn's body. With that evidence in hand, agents obtained a federal arrest warrant for James Robert Cruz, Jr. The FBI and the Pennsylvania State Police had identified the man who had brutally raped and murdered a young woman. On September 8, 1993, with a federal arrest warrant, Agent Kohik and Trooper Madden arrested James Robert Cruz, Jr. when he returned from another trucking run. As they made the arrest, Cruz suddenly dropped his easygoing attitude.
One of the differences between the initial interview of Mr. Cruz and the arrest of Mr. Cruz was his demeanor.
I didn't do anything, man.
No longer was he the cool, calm, and collected person he had been during the initial interview that we had with him. Instead, Mr. Cruz appeared to be very sullen and was angry towards both Agent Kohik and myself.
Cruz's arrest was the reward for determined investigators committed to catching the killer of a girl who could have been anyone's daughter. Just 6 months earlier, investigators had only a body in the snow near an interstate with no ID. He was charged with first, second, and third-degree murder, rape, kidnapping, and the federal charge of unlawful flight to avoid prosecution.
But I'd like to take a few minutes.
For Dawn, the nightmare started as an adventure. On Sunday, March 21st, she left her friend Heidi at a movie theater near their school in Poland Springs, Maine. Dawn headed for Bangor, where she hoped to meet John Hoffman. A friendly trucker gave her a ride. She and John had been separated for months, and she looked forward to seeing him. But he wasn't there. She could not have known he was missing and presumed dead. Instead, her life would intersect with that of a much more sinister man. James Robert Cruz, Jr.
No, I'm okay. I'm fine.
Dawn spent the day of March 22nd making calls at the Dysart truck stop in
But look, I was
Bangor.
just calling to let you know I'm safe.
She telephoned friends, letting them know where she was and that she was safe.
Okay. We'll just tell everybody I'm okay. I appreciate that.
She also talked to her school counselor, Mark Rosenberg, to say she'd run away, but was fine and promised to call him that evening.
Okay. Oh, hang on a second. Hang on.
She wrote his numbers on her hand for safekeeping. When James Robert Cruz paid for his gas, he saw Dawn on the phone, just 15 feet from the cash register.
All right, well, we'll keep in touch, okay? All right. Bye.
Cruz signed the credit card receipt, billing the gas to his employer in Ohio.
Okay.
Cool out there.
Yeah. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Hey, mister. Where are you headed? Do you think you might be stopping in Georgia? Can I get a ride?
Absolutely. Get in.
Thanks.
It didn't take much to convince him to give her a ride. She and Cruz would head south. Prosecutors reconstructed the events that had led to Dawn Birnbaum's death. She had no idea of the danger that lay ahead. The hours she spent with James Robert Cruz would be her last. While Dawn prepared to sleep for the night, Cruz was still awake, falsifying his logbook. Dawn would soon find herself a helpless captive, trapped by a cruel predator, with no escape. Late on March 23rd, Cruz raped and strangled her, probably in the sleeping compartment of his truck.
That's what it was.
That same night, after buying gas in Pennsylvania, he disconnected his cab from his trailer at the travel port. He drove away, looking for a place to leave Dawn's body. Cruz drove through the backwoods of Pennsylvania, anxious to dump the lifeless girl. In the wee hours of March 24th, he pulled over to the side of the road. He pushed Dawn's body out of the truck and onto the side of a highway entrance ramp.
Chose not to.
Cruz almost certainly believed he'd never be caught.
That's what it was.
And if not for dedicated investigators, advanced forensics testing, and plain good luck, he might easily have gotten away with murder. District Attorney Ray Griecar served as prosecutor.
And one point that I wanted to emphasize to the jury was how long it took Dawn to die at the hands of James Cruz. The pathologist testified that from the moment the rope was knotted around her neck, it took 4 minutes for her to die.
Griecar's approach was effective. On June 14th, after 14 hours of deliberation, the jury found James Robert Cruz, Jr. guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced Cruz immediately to life in prison without parole. He is serving his time at the Greene County Maximum Security Prison in western Pennsylvania.
The legacy of this investigation, I would say, is the fact that at the beginning of the investigation, all we had was a young girl laying in a snow pile who had died a death no one should have to die. No identification on her for the most part, and a very strong concern among law enforcement agencies that she would not ever be identified, much less have the killer caught and convicted.
Have Cruz behind bars. We have to make
But it seemed Kohik and Madden may have performed an even greater service than they first realized.
Sequenced with what we've got.
At the time of the arrest, there was a lot of media interest in Cruz because in his own home state of Ohio, there had been a number of young women found along the highways and on-ramps over the previous year or two, and who had been tied up as well and left along on-ramps. A review of our VICAP database indicated over the previous 10 years there were approximately 600 young women that were found along the highways and who had died in a suspicious manner.
We were not able to conclusively state that Mr. Cruz was involved in any of these murders. What we do know is that after the arrest of Mr. Cruz, the murders that we were talking about in the state of Ohio ceased.
For Dawn Birnbaum, peace had finally come. The gentle people of Bellefonte will always remember her, and the killer who took her life and changed theirs forever.
The police are meant to protect us from the worst of society. We trust them to uphold the law and keep us safe. But what happens when the protector becomes the predator?
He's performing as the protector of the public. On the other hand, he's actually a really dark monster.
Is that how you obtain this material?
And the people who are meant to keep us safe become dangerous.
I'm arrested on suspicion of attempted murder.
Even though you're a police officer, people will feel that they're above the law.
But how would you catch a criminal who thinks like a cop?
He's got a head start on the investigation team.
He's panicking at this point, and he's now running.
I've enlisted the help of 3 experts. 2 senior officers that have put hundreds of offenders behind bars.
Most people, they know when their back's against the wall and they're going to get convicted for something.
The horror is one of us.
And a leading psychologist who can analyse the criminal mind.
Underlying that anger is the need to dominate, is the need to control.
In this series, I'll discover cops who put themselves on the wrong side of the law.
He's like a Jekyll and Hyde character.
Abuse their power and commit horrific crimes.
He should never have had that badge, ever.
Keeping my kids safe is my top priority. The idea that someone would harm them is my worst nightmare. But for a cop to do it is a complete betrayal of trust. In December 2022, information is passed to South Wales Police that someone on their patch has been buying child sex abuse images online. The images are classed as Category A, the most serious that there is.
The feeling of betrayal you have, and shock, and upset, and sheer horror that someone has been doing this is really hard to get your mind around.
What I'm saying to you is when we examine this hard drive and this desktop computer, where we fully examine it, are we going to find evidence of you engaging in sexual communication with children?
No comment.
Inciting children to engage in sexual activity and sending you pictures and videos of themselves?
No comment.
Indecent images and videos?
No comment.
Former Detective Chief Superintendent Fiona Mallon has investigated serious sex abuse offences throughout her 30-year career. She knows just how dangerous these offenders can be and how to get them off the street quickly. Where does the investigation start?
Intelligence is passed to the force around the use of a person at that stage using Bitcoin to purchase images of children in sexual abuse cases. And then that alerts the force and the Digital and Cyber Investigation Unit to start looking into it.
The suspect has been using Bitcoin to buy explicit images of children, some as young as 10.
He was operating on the dark web, which is a protected environment, highly sophisticated, highly guarded by those who use it. Then shortly after New Year that year, the team received another piece of intel that the same person is then uploading images onto Snapchat. But then what this gives the team is the IP address, which means they get a name and they can start looking and they discover the subject is actually a serving police officer in South Wales Police, Lewis Edwards.
What do they do next?
Suddenly, the shock, the feeling of, he's one of us. We have got to act quickly. So apart from the disbelief and the shock and the horror, it's the professionalism that kicks in straight away. All the training, all the knowledge, all your experience, straight away. We've got to secure the evidence and we've got to get hold of Edwards.
The race is on to build a case and arrest 23-year-old cop Lewis Edwards before he gets wind of the investigation and tries to destroy any incriminating evidence.
It's critical at this time to keep the information safe. So they limit it to a number of people, experts working in that digital team, because they can't afford for it to leak out and for Edwards to be alerted. So they protect the information and then they start planning how they're going to now get to the home address, secure evidence and make the arrest.
It takes the team 6 weeks to build their case in secret. All the while, Lewis is working as a police officer with no idea that his colleagues are onto him. Then, on February the 8th, 2023, Edwards' family home in Bridgend is raided. The officers are stunned by what they find.
He's in bed, he's got 2 phones with him, but they also found a huge office of digital complex machines, drives, hardware, storage facilities, where he'd been using to set up his own digital camp, if you like, which is highly complex.
Edwards is taken away for questioning by his fellow officers, who he'd been working alongside just days before.
I'm just on my way to South Wales to meet someone who knows his case better than most. And I just hope he can shed some light on how a serving police officer can get away with what Edwards did right under their noses. No one noticed.
Philip Dewey is a local journalist who followed the story closely.
What's it like round here?
It's quite a sort of tight-knit community in Bridgend. Everyone seems to know each other. Sort of gossip travels quite fast.
What kind of police officer was Lewis Edwards?
Edwards first became a police officer in 2021. As a young man, he was just beginning his career in the force. He was a very isolated person, kept himself to himself. He lived with his parents, and a lot of the time he'd spend his time in his bedroom on his computer. Outside of his work with the police, I don't think many people would have known him.
So when the community found out about what's been going on in this area, how did they react?
I think it was just utter disbelief that this person was a police officer. Obviously, they're the people you go to for help, they're the people who are there to protect you. I think it was just utter disbelief in how could have this happened in our town.
Edwards sounds like a loner outside of work. What do we know about his career with the police?
What would he do on a day-to-day basis?
He was in his probationary stage, which is where your learning and your training stage. He would have also been seeing members of the public and answering calls and being tutored through that process.
If he's going through his probation period, that means he's only just gone through vetting.
Yes, so all the checks would have been done in terms of his background, his family home, his education, and he'd have passed and carried on.
Surely there must have been somebody, either one of his colleagues or in his past at school or in the neighbourhood, who pointed out that they thought there was something wrong with Lewis Edwards.
Nothing has come to light at all. There were no sort of flags around worrying behaviour, people feeling uncomfortable. There were no information reports or intelligence reports from any of his background. You still have an image of what paedophiles look like, and it's not somebody in a raincoat on the street corner, you know, an old person potentially, you know, the stereotype. It's not. They come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and it's a really obvious thing to say, but it's the shock. This person doesn't look like that, fit that mould, do that job.
As a police officer, Edwards knew full well what he was doing was wrong, and he'd figured out exactly how to keep his despicable secret from those around him. It's up to the investigators to get the evidence they need before it's lost for good.
The amount of knowledge and experience he's got as a relatively young man is frightening. He had confidence because he could get rid of it at the touch of a button, remotely, and no one would know.
Police officer Lewis Edwards' home in Bridgend has been raided, following intelligence that he'd been purchasing child sexual abuse images online. To help me understand where investigators would even start with something like this, I'm speaking to retired Detective Chief Inspector Howard Groves. He's got over 34 years' experience investigating serious crime, including child sex abuse cases. I want to find out what would have happened when Edwards' colleagues came knocking on his door.
They would have explained to him what the investigation was about, that they were looking to recover devices such as computers, laptops, phones, and give him the opportunity to explain where those items may be. The specialists that were looking at those devices were reasonably confident that they had been encrypted. Edwards was making sure that if anybody else got hold of those items, they wouldn't be able to access them.
So Edwards probably thought, I'm safe here, they're not looking for me.
Of course. So once the officers get the search warrant, not only do they have detectives and uniformed officers that attend, they'll also have officers who are expert at looking at devices, and then they have the necessary equipment to download the information before they take the computer away. They're hoping that on those items are the images and transactions that he's done via the web, so that's critical to the investigation. Actually, just physically having those items is one part of it, but it's actually what is contained is even more important.
But Edwards is savvy. Not only is his tech encrypted to obstruct prying eyes, he's gone to great lengths to prevent the police ever getting the evidence that he knows they need.
The digital setup he had at his home address was so sophisticated. Officers stayed there for 2 to 3 days, determined to recover all of the evidence.
Edwards isn't stupid. I mean, he's been planning this. He's been meticulous with this.
He's a high organised individual, but he takes it to the next level. So he knows if he's at work, for example, and someone puts a phone call in, or someone comes into his house or gets access to his bedroom where he's all set up, the rig he's got is that it can be sort of tripwired if he's not there and all closed down, and all the imagery will be lost, saving him.
So if somebody went in there and tried to turn it on or whatever, everything would be wiped?
Yes.
That takes a lot of intelligence to be able to set something up like that.
I wouldn't even know where to begin to encrypt my devices, let alone have a system to remotely destroy my files. Where did Edwards get all this know-how?
I know we talk a lot about police officers having knowledge and experience, but a lot of times that information is out there in the public domain. You can do your own research on a lot of this stuff.
Do you think Edwards thought he was one step ahead?
Yeah, I'm sure Edwards felt he was one step ahead of the game. But in the fullness of time, during the course of that investigation, he'd realized that, I'm going to hide into nothing.
Edwards thought that even if his colleagues came for him, he'd be able to dig his way out. And when it came to covering his tracks, he thought he was way ahead of them.
How did he respond when the police finally went and arrested him?
When police did finally arrive at Edward's home, he was quite calm, quite collected. He didn't react in a strange manner. When he was asked questions, he didn't really respond. He was asked to give his PIN number and said, I don't want to do that now.
Despite Edwards refusing to cooperate, police experts managed to break his encryption, access his devices, and start cataloguing the crucial evidence.
What did they find?
4,500 images of children in compromising positions.
4,500 images?
Yeah. Not only was he in possession of that many images, he had also categorized them into folders based on their age and based on what was depicted on those images.
So, you're talking about somebody here who's obsessed with children?
I think obsessed is exactly the right way to look at it. Bearing in mind he was a police officer, there are even times when he was on duty, the records show that he was actually looking at some of those images.
Investigators discover over 30 occasions where he'd accessed this material whilst on duty. It's unbelievable.
We know he spent the majority of his time on the internet, even when he was at work, and you would think he's doing police business.
So he was an absolute monster?
Yes, he was.
As a cop, Edwards thought that staying silent would be the best way to avoid incriminating himself and prevent his former colleagues from building their case against him.
People search the internet to find indecent images of children. Is that how you obtain this material?
No comment.
Do you, other means we know are like via the dark web, people access the dark web.
No comment.
Is that how you go about obtaining this type of material?
No comment.
You've got to be professional, but you've fathers out there, you know, who've got daughters, and knowing that Lewis Edwards has been working amongst you, there must be a human response there.
There is a human response. On those occasions, those senior officers are then going to have to be going back. They would have had maybe confidential conversations with some of his colleagues, just to build up a picture to see whether anybody could actually say, yeah, you know what, I had my misgivings about a particular thing. So they would want to make sure that, you know, there weren't opportunities to have dealt with him before, and they hadn't.
The scary thing about this is that this was all going on right under the noses of his friends and his family and his work colleagues, and no one had any idea what he was up to.
Sadly, this isn't the end of the story.
The digital team find thousands of images of girls aged between 10 and 16. And within that, they then find further offences.
The images were just the tip of the iceberg. Collecting 4,500 indecent images of kids is bad enough, but things were about to get even worse.
They discover Edwards is not only buying child sexual images, he's also making them himself and distributing them. They ascertained that Edwards had groomed in excess of 200 children, girls, with numerous conversations, and asked them for pictures. But in addition to that, he'd also employed the use of sophisticated screening capability and recording capability for the snapshots. So therefore, when he was speaking and grooming and conversing with his victims, they didn't know they were being recorded.
He had actually incited girls as young as 10, up to the age of 16, to commit, you know, sexual acts on themselves. I think to start with, he would have probably just sent harmless photos to them, you know. It could be anything. And then eventually, once he was happy and confident around them, and he knew that they were confident in him, that's when he would have started to ask for images of the girls.
I mean, it must be a horrendous job having to go through the files that they find.
They also found out that he had actually set up fake accounts on Snapchat, and that was for the purposes of ensuring that he could then identify girls as young as 10 up to 16.
What I'm hearing is just terrifying. These are someone's daughters, totally innocent and naive. Edwards is presenting himself as a teenager to trick them and manipulate them into doing things that no young girl should be doing.
Edwards, in order to gain the trust of the girls he was speaking to, presented himself as a 14-year-old boy.
The photos he used to portray himself online were a far cry from who the girls were actually talking to.
Spoke to them about problems in his own life, claimed that he was having a tough sort of upbringing, having a tough home life, and that this conversation with this particular girl was sort of saving him, and it was preventing him from killing himself.
So he was gaining their trust before he was going to finally get them to do these horrendous things for him.
Yeah, that was the key thing. He had to gain their trust, and the best way of doing that was to come across as a vulnerable teenager like the people he was speaking to.
Have you ever come across anybody in your profession of what you're doing in reporting like this?
The scale that Edwards went into is something I haven't seen before.
For the tight-knit community in Bridgend, it must have been like a bomb going off. A paedophile hiding in plain sight, working as a cop. Following his arrest in February 2023, Edwards continues stonewalling his colleagues.
When he was interviewed, Edwards answered no comment to all questions, which was his right, but in my opinion showed a certain arrogance that he didn't have to provide an explanation for what he had done. Officers asked him a range of questions about how he came into this world, what he'd been searching for in the dark web, how he had managed to get his victims to do this, and most importantly, why he had done this. But again, to all questions, he answered no comment.
Another method might be to directly communicate with the child, whether that be using a profile suggesting you're an adult or profile suggesting you yourself may be a child, and then getting children to send material, what we would call first generation material, to you. Is that how you obtain your images and your decent images?
I actually feel for his colleagues in the police. First, the shock of having served alongside him, but then having to go through all the images, and the horror of what he did would have sunk in. It'd been terrible.
The team continue to interrogate the imagery, and they view it over 2 to 3 months. They're really, really thorough. But what comes next is far, far worse.
In early 2023, South Wales Police discovered that one of their own officers has not only been buying child sexual abuse images on the dark web, but also grooming children, pretending to be a teenager and getting them to send explicit photos and videos. I can't get my head round it. My kids are on social media, and all this stuff about Edwards has got me worried about what they might be seeing or who they might be chatting to. I want to find out more, and I'm hoping tech expert Dan Serdegren can help.
Lewis Edwards was caught because he was on the dark web and he was buying images of children. Can you explain what the dark web is?
The dark web is a load of interconnected technology which acts like the internet, yes, but you can't get on it without sophisticated kit.
And what's it used for?
A lot of the dark web use is for illegal activities. So you can buy all sorts of things on there. It can be guns, it can be drugs, it can be all sorts of things. So unfortunately, a lot of criminals use the dark web. We've got some screenshots here on the dark web, and you can see you can buy weapons, you can buy drugs, you can buy guns and ammo. It's quite blatant what's there. And the reason why it can be so blatant, of course, is it's so hard to trace and so hard to track.
What I don't understand is, if it's selling stuff that's illegal, why can't they just shut it down?
Saying that is a bit like saying, how do we shut down the sky? Bad things happen in the sky, therefore we shut down the sky. It can't be done. The internet will always be there, and the dark web, just like the normal web, is likely always to be there. It's almost impossible to shut the whole thing down.
Edwards was pretending to be a 14-year-old boy to lure these young girls in. I mean, is that how easy it is? Just pretending to be somebody else?
Well, when you sign up to a lot of social media sites, they're simply going to say, put in your age. You could say you were 18 when you were younger. You could put in a variety of different things into there, of course, and my guess, of course, is he was saying he was a lot younger. It's literally just a click away, and you could be almost any age you want.
I'm disgusted by the fact that all this stuff was being done by a police officer, someone who is supposed to uphold the law. Edwards knew what he was doing was wrong, and yet he carried on, with zero regard for the girls he was abusing or the community he was meant to be serving. But what Edwards would go on to do with the illegal pictures he gathered was just plain evil.
Edwards gets more confident, more aggressive, more threatening, more controlling. And he goes back to those victims he'd first engaged with and asks them for pictures, but now he threatens them. So he begins a campaign of blackmail against those victims to ensure he has a continual supply of imagery.
What sort of a person does that?
I mean, he's a police officer. Edward's position of trust and authority hasn't stopped him from breaking the law. He's not only been grooming underage girls online, he's also been blackmailing them. It's sickening. This is a grown man pushing young girls to do stuff they don't understand or want to do, making them believe they have no choice.
He won't let up, he won't stop. In fact, he found in his home address is a blackmail manual where he's really sort of progressing in his offending, which is really worrying in terms of how far this was going to go.
So he's reading up on how he can blackmail young girls and get them to do what he wants them to do.
This is the worry, in that how he's moved from collecting, capturing and sharing, he's now hurting people. I've got 30 years in as a police officer, but when you consider young girls pleading and crying for their lives, in one case, a girl says, "I've got my GCSEs tomorrow, please, can it stop?" And he says, no, carry on, I'm gonna hurt you, carry on. And she says, "But I just want it to stop, please make it stop." And that's just one example of hundreds.
This is beyond comprehension. Edward's predatory behaviour is so horrific, it's like nothing I've ever heard before.
He threatened to post these images online for all to see, or to send them to family and friends. And obviously these girls were very young and just scared about that happening, so in order to keep him happy, they were required to send even more obscene images of them taking part in sexual acts, including masturbation, involving hairbrushes and straighteners. And in a lot of these images, the children were very distressed, crying, begging for him to stop. Yeah, they were some of the worst examples of indecent images of children you can get.
Seems like Edwards felt untouchable. He thought his victims would never tell. He thought the police would never trace him. He was cocky. And what makes me angry is that he felt that secure.
His MO was basically threats. You know, if you don't do what I want you to do, I am going to do something that you're not going to like. I'm going to mete out violence to you, your family members, your friend. I'm going to burn your house down.
Didn't any of the children that he was grooming say anything to their families or their parents or anything?
There was one particular girl who she was in conversation with Edwards on her phone, and she was that distressed that she went to see her father and handed him the phone. And the father then spoke to what he thought was a 14-year-old, James, and said, "Look, can you stop what you're doing? Please stop." And Edward's response was laugh out loud, like, you know.
What, like lol?
Yeah, lol, you know, laugh out loud. I'm, you know, showing no compassion or anything for what was happening.
Is that because he probably thought that the young girl was pretending to be the dad?
Yeah, so what the father then did, he sent a picture of himself and said, "No, this is actually me talking to you. You need to stop this." At which point, Edwards made a comment along the lines of, "Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I'm not going to send it anywhere else." So that's the only time that you think Edwards is thinking to himself, "Oh, my dear, how is this going to impact on me going forward?"
So he wasn't worried about the girl. He was more worried about himself if her dad outed him. Edwards, for me, is beyond vile. I hate anyone messing with innocent people, especially children, and all for his own sexual gratification, tormenting them, bullying them, blackmailing them, to tears, begging him, and he didn't stop. To help me understand the twisted mind of this predator in uniform, I'm meeting with psychologist Serena Simmons.
They're the lowest of the low, these kind of people. And he was a police officer. Is that his cover to go, look, I'm respectable, I'm a police officer, no one's going to look for me?
Well, I think what having the role as police officer did was it allowed the world to keep away. It kept a facade up to the rest of the world that he was an upstanding citizen, a professional. I think every day that Edwards went into work and interacted with other people, he was acting, because I think Edwards got most of his pleasure and his focus in his life was what he did behind the scenes. I think everything that gave him enjoyment in life was committing these despicable acts. Everything else was just a function, really, of that. It enabled him to live his rich fantasy life. I think this is a very, very dangerous young man, very dangerous. The bits that I think are particularly fascinating about his profile is the sadistic elements of his crimes. He really, really focused on humiliation of those young girls. And I think he really wanted to enjoy having control and dominance over them. And I think really what that tells us about him is that there wasn't really much going on in his real life.
You don't take children's innocence away. He was doing it in the worst possible way and making them feel bad about it as well and getting off on it.
He caused great, great anxiety in those poor young girls who were victim to what he was doing. I think we need to remember that someone like Edwards is getting all of their pleasure and the thrill from doing these very, very things. It's really hard for us to make sense of that, because how could you be so cruel? How could someone get excitement and enjoy that process?
Does he not think for 1 second the damage he's doing to these young girls?
I don't think he cares for 1 second that he's hurt them. We have to always remember the victims here and remember that they have been through something deeply traumatic.
There were over 200 girls that he was in contact with. The investigation didn't just happen in his local area. 15 different police forces across the UK were actually involved in that investigation.
It is unbelievable.
As the young girls struggle with the trauma of what they've endured, the police are meticulously piecing together a case against Edwards, even as he continues to stay silent.
We're going to find evidence of you engaging in sexual communication with children.
They know that ultimately, if he sticks to that course all the way through to trial, that at the end of the day, the judge will say to the jury, you, the jury, you can make your own inference from his silence.
On the 26th of May 2023, South Wales police officer Lewis Edwards was charged with over 160 counts relating to child sexual offences. Yet he continues to say nothing. With the evidence mounting up, I'm not sure that's the best line of defence.
I've managed hundreds and hundreds of covert operations, particularly using digital capability. And you know, once the digital evidence is there, it is very, very hard to go not guilty. It's really, because the evidence is there, your name's on it, your face is often on it, your voice is on it. You can be digitally put into that place at the time. There's very little wiggle room for you to start explaining, because what can you explain? Those police officers in South Wales worked tirelessly to get that evidence and get him to court. He pleaded before he got to court. He had nowhere to go, so he had to plead guilty.
At hearings in May and September 2023, Edwards pleads guilty to 160 separate offences. But what about his career in the police force?
South Wales police take a really robust approach and they suspend him immediately. The long-lasting impact of being dismissed through a misconduct panel such as that is that Edwards is on a barred list for ever joining the police service again or being put in a position of trust.
Besides the shame of being thrown out of the police force, he was also due in court on the 23rd of October 2023 for sentencing. As local and national press descended on Cardiff Crown Court.
For 2 days, this court had listened to accounts and watched recordings of the trauma, abuse and panic these and so many other girls had suffered, much of which is simply too harrowing to report. Hiding his identity, posing as a teenage boy, he'd contacted more than 200 girls on social media, including Snapchat, on 30 occasions, even while at work.
It was very, very busy in the courtroom. Obviously, there was a lot of members of the press like myself there, barristers and the judge. Only person who was missing was Lewis Edwards, who refused to leave his cell.
So Edwards didn't go to court?
No, he refused to attend. He basically refused to leave his cell and didn't want to appear in public for his sentencing, which was sort of the ultimate insult to the victims and their families.
Why do you think he didn't want to be in court?
I think he just didn't want to face the reality of the situation, ultimately to avoid scrutiny. Obviously, there would have been a lot of prying eyes in the courtroom looking at him, judging him as a sentence was passed. So I think he cowardly refused to accept the situation and just remained in his cell. The public gallery was packed with victims and members of their families, and statements were read out by the mothers of some of the victims in court, which were very powerful to hear.
It even further tells me how much of a coward he is. That he's done all this to all these innocent people, and he couldn't even go and face their families and them in court.
What sticks in my mind the most is watching the videos in court of the victims as they were being abused by Edwards. Just hearing them crying, begging for help, begging for him to stop what he was doing. Obviously, the video was pixelated, but hearing their sort of cries for help and pleading with Edwards will just something I'll never forget.
We have a really, really powerful statement from one of the young girls. If I just read it to you, she says, "I was only a little girl. I feel confused, embarrassed, disgusted, and I have no self-esteem. I lost my innocence, I feel guilty, and I still struggle to trust people." An incredibly, incredibly sad statement, and yet it probably encapsulates how so many of those young girls are feeling at this point, because although this was a fleeting thing for Edwards, this is something that he did for pleasure, this is something that these young girls are going to live with for the rest of their lives.
The level of danger posed to children by the defendant is very high. I am satisfied that that risk will continue long into the future, and it is not possible to say when that risk will cease.
In heartbreaking statements read to the court, many of Edwards' victims described feeling dirty and ashamed, as well as suffering ongoing mental health problems. Many parents told of their children becoming withdrawn and even self-harming. Handing Edwards from Kevin Glass in Bridgend a life sentence today with a minimum term of 12 years, the judge told him he was a psychologically manipulative predator.
Even though Edwards told the court he was sorry for his actions, former Detective Chief Superintendent Fiona Mallon doesn't buy it, and she thinks he's got off lightly.
He's sentenced for 12 years, after 4,500 images had been found. 12 years.
12 years. They cannot let Lewis Edwards back on the street. They can't. It's too dangerous, in my opinion.
We should be thinking far, far, far higher in terms of 30, 40 years, because they will come out and they will offend again.
And that, I'm sorry for what I've done. Do you believe that? Do you believe he actually is remorseful?
He wasn't sorry when he was watching 10-year-old girls insert implements into their bodies, making them bleed. He wasn't sorry when girls were crying, asking him to stop. And he wasn't sorry when others were screaming and hysterical and in pain. He didn't stop then, so why would he stop now?
Although Edwards made his half-hearted apology and even had the gall to try and get his sentence reduced, he refused to reveal the identity of those he was sharing these horrific images with. But what about those young girls who were subject to PC Edwards' depraved ways? What happens to them?
It's not unusual for people and young people in this situation who've experienced abuse of this nature, and it is really significant abuse, to feel quite generally those feelings of shame and guilt. And they'll have to work on those for a long time. So really, these young people will need a lot of support to process what's happened.
There's one thing about these young innocent girls trusting people, but again, the trust in the police. This was someone who's supposed to protect you. This is someone your family bring you up to say, if you have any problems, find a policeman, they'll look after you. You know, that's what I used to tell my kids. Now, what's this going to do to that?
I think it's very natural for these young girls to feel that their trust has been eroded when they see a police officer, and just in general how they might relate to the police. So I think this is now the job of the police to rebuild their reputation, to rebuild people's trust in them. So there's a lot of work ahead, I think, for the police in kind of making that happen.
Edwards isn't the only cop who's been found guilty of child sexual abuse offences. In the past 3 years alone, police officer Mark Rosebery from Greater Manchester Police and retired cops Jeremy Laxton and Jack Addis from the Met have also been jailed. But despite public criticism, South Wales Police believe there was nothing more they could have done before employing Edwards.
I understand there will be people asking how Edwards could have joined the police at the same time he was committing these terrible crimes. At the time of him joining South Wales Police, his vetting was clear, and there was nothing to indicate that he was involved in such abhorrent offences against children.
This case has really affected me. It's just the thought of kids as young as 10, and they're going to have to live with this for the rest of their lives, and their parents discovering what he did to them under their own roof, and they couldn't protect them from this predator. It's horrendous. But at least Edwards is in prison, and that's exactly where he should be.